stressed the need for member countries to consider all the ways of mobilizing financial resources from each member state with strategic partners to counter terrorism and accelerate economic growth of the region.
Warmly congratulate our brothers President BOLA Tinubu of Nigeria and Julius Maada Bio of Sierra Leone on the election and their election respectively to the supreme magistracy of their country, and wish them great success and considering the fact of these two great brothers people. This presidential election considered reinforcing the democracy foundation of our community. Despite the setback that we have registered in recent years with the unconstitutional change in some Ecowas members countries.
President of the Ecowas Commission, Omar Alieu Toure, has on behalf of the community and institutions congratulated His Excellency Bola Ahmed Tinubu on his election and assumption of office as the President of Nigeria, which is the biggest economy and country in Africa. Omar also expressed appreciation to President Umaru Sissoco Embalo for his leadership as chair of the Economic Community of West African States ECOWAS in the past 12 months, stating that the community has recorded several achievements to be discussed later at the meeting.
I would like, therefore, to welcome President Tinubu to his first meeting of the ECOWAS Authority. On behalf of the community institutions, I would like to extend our felicitation and best wishes in piloting the affairs of Africa's biggest economy and the largest country, the Federal Republic of Nigeria. We bid farewell to your predecessor, His Excellency Muhammadu Buhari, who chaired the ECOWAS Authority from July 2018 to July 2019, and provided tremendous support to the ECOWAS efforts towards political stability in the Gambia, served as the ECOWAS champion for the fight against COVID-19, effectively leading a regional response to the pandemic, and approved the building of a new befitting office for the ECOWAS Parliament, side by side the new ECOWAS Commission headquarters, which is being built by the government of China in Abuja.
He also congratulated the President of Sierra Leone, His Excellency Julius Maada Bio, on his re-election. The 63rd session, which is still ongoing, has been ranked the most attended by the heads of state of member countries.
You're also watching the agenda, and we're looking at ECOWAS leadership as the baton passes hands to Nigeria's President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. It is quite a remarkable development considering how ECOWAS has fared over the years in its 48 years since inception. And so much is expected. You can get more of the story on the website at ln247.news and definitely see the story, get the story behind the story as we take you on this expedition on the African continent on today's edition of the program. Well, we just saw congratulatory messages coming in to the President Tinubu on his assumption of office, which will commence in the next year. Now, let's look at the history of ECOWAS right now, taking a look at the history of this bloc, this sub-regional bloc. The Economic Community of West African States was created by the Treaty of Lagos on May the 28th, 1975 in Lagos, southwest Nigeria. ECOWAS was established to promote cooperation and integration in order to create an economic and monetary union for promoting economic growth and development in West Africa. With that, 15 members were formed, including Benin Republic, Burkina Faso, Cape Verde, Cote d'Ivoire, the Gambia, Ghana, Guinea-Bissau, Liberia, just to mention a few. Now, what's the vision of this bloc, this sub-regional bloc? ECOWAS was set up to foster the ideals of collective self-sufficiency for its member states. As a trading union, it also meant to create a single large trading bloc through economic cooperation. Well, you might ask, how has it fared? Has it been able to accomplish this vision? That is totally a different kettle of fish, but definitely there is so much to talk about this economic bloc, ECOWAS. How much is ECOWAS worth? Looking at an economic output of $724.70 billion US annually. They represent around 0.75% of the global economy. The value of all exported goods from these 15 countries was $128.51 billion US per year at the last count. Now let's take a look at the issues bordering other issues now. For years, Nigeria's funding to the 15-member body stood at 3 to 6 times what other nations contributed. That ratio rose recently to over 60% of ECOWAS' total revenues, with the introduction of community levies, according to data showing annual statewide contributions.
Nigeria's funding to the 15-member body stood at 3 to 6 times what other nations contributed. That ratio rose recently to over 60% of ECOWAS' total revenues with the introduction of community levies, according to data showing annual statewide contributions. But in reality, Nigeria receives a thrashing on any matter requiring voting. Its opinions are often discarded, and not only do shortages exist on her staff quota for a nation with millions of unemployed, some of the openings are seized on by smaller but smarter nations. In 16 years, Nigeria has contributed more than $1.177 billion to the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, as its community levy, and this is the highest contribution by any member state since inception. Nigeria has immensely contributed to ECOWAS: power supply to member states, medical interventions and peacekeeping efforts in member states including the Gambia, Mali, Sierra Leone, Guinea-Bissau, Liberia, among others. In 2020, the House of Representatives resolved to review the benefits and contributions of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, to Nigeria's social and economic development for the past 10 years. ECOWAS Vision 2050, a new regional perspective frame of reference for the next 30 years, proclaims that ECOWAS must become a community of people by placing more emphasis on infrastructural development, integration, youth and women. Despite Nigeria's larger-than-life financial contributions to the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, the country and its citizens have not benefited immensely.
Now, meanwhile, the newly elected ECOWAS chairperson, President BOLA Tinubu, reaffirmed the bloc's commitment to democracy as the best form of governance. The Nigerian president was in BISSAU with fellow West African leaders, promising firmness in the face of coups. The 15-member bloc has witnessed a total of 5 coups in 3 member countries since 2020. He said insecurity and creeping terrorism were stunting the progress and development of the region.
We must be firm on democracy. Democracy being the best form of government. We sat here, we made some sacrifices for it. We need it to be an example to the rest of Africa and the world. Without democracy, there's no governance, there's no freedom, there's no rule of law. We will not allow coup after coup in West Africa.
Right, a very firm speech coming from Nigeria's president and chairperson for ECOWAS. However, a report on African governments released in January finds much of the continent in less safe, secure, and democratic than it was 10 years ago, according to citing a surge in military coups and armed conflicts. The democratic backsliding now threatens to reverse decades of progress made in Africa, according to an index of governance compiled by the Mo Ibrahim Foundation that notes 23 successful and attempted coups in 2012. British billionaire since 2012. Now, British billionaire born in Sudan, who's using his fortune to promote democracy and political accountability in Africa, Mo Ibrahim says the phenomenon of coup d'etats that was common in the 80s seems to have become fashionable again in certain parts of Africa. His foundation's report cited 8 successful coups just since 2019. Mali and neighboring Burkina Faso have seen 2 each during that time, further destabilizing a part of the world already under siege by Islamic militants. Let's take a look at the Mo Ibrahim report on coups in West Africa. And we see that report, if we can take a look at that report now. Well, a look at that report says, a look at the Mo Ibrahim Foundation's report on coups in West Africa says there is a risk of trading off developments for security, the rule of law, and rights. It also looks at the challenge of peaceful transition of power from 2008 to 2022, looking at Guinea, Mali, and Burkina Faso, who are the latest culprits of power grab examples. Now, the report shows about 7 elections conducted, 7 elections that were conducted of power grabs. We had 7 successful coups. We also had 2 failed coups, 2 assassination attempts, 1 mass protest, and referendum. The report sums it up by saying that in the run-up to the most recent coups, all 3 countries saw waves of anti-government protests, emphasizing citizen dissatisfaction with governance in their countries. Presidents are also facing a trust crisis in all 3 countries. The military is a more trusted entity than the president. In Burkina Faso and Mali, around every 8 out of 10 citizens trust the military somewhat or a lot. That doesn't speak well, does it? Well, we go for a break, and when we return, ECOWAS Chair President Tinubu vows firmness in the face of coups. We'll be right back.
LN 24/7 is first of all a news station.
Well, we'll continue with updates from the just concluded governorship
in the southeast has raised questions if INEC will be able to conduct elections.
With a core team of over 40 correspondents spread across Nigeria.
Nigeria is set to take its place.
The unions of aviation workers are out here protesting.
And affiliates in Africa, Europe, America, and Asia. We give you news as it breaks from the perspective you can trust.
LN 24/7 News, where the story goes, we go.
Our march to freedom is irreversible. We must not allow fear to stand in our way. I have fought against white domination.
No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream.
This is LN 24/7. Glad to have you back. And still on the agenda, Tinubu has called for collective action from member states, pledging that under his leadership, frameworks would be harmonized to actualize dreams of Ecowas. The president noted that Ecowas had developed security architecture that covers a wide range of areas that involved kinetic and non-kinetic operations, including preventive diplomacy. He said there is also the regional plan of action on the fight against terrorism 2020 to 2024, as well as the nationalization of the Ecowas standby force on the fight against terrorism. Meanwhile, billionaire business mogul Mo Ibrahim has been critical of African leaders for not investing in capacity building of its infrastructure, of their security architecture, and the training of soldiers who end up turning their guns against civil authorities, which is a violation of the principles upon which they were hired, which is to defend the sovereignty of their nations. He warned that we must not sit in Ecowas as toothless bulldogs, but strengthen democratic institutions and ensure the respect for human rights and the rule of law. With it seeming like coup d'etats are beginning to rear their ugly head again in the region, Ecowas envoy Omar Toure, in his speech to mark 48 years of the bloc's existence, called on leaders to abide by handover timelines. The Ecowas Commission chief, responding to the challenge of power grabs in the region, in his speech to mark the 48th anniversary of the bloc, urged member countries to keep their transition timelines or face sanctions. Now, how altruistic is the UN and its donor agencies when these are the same organizations accused of sponsoring a population control through their donor agencies like the World Food Program? Yet it would be interesting to see how President Tinubu understands the global play and renewed efforts to capture the region and keep it dependent on Western donors while its resources are plagued. Let's listen to Ecowas Commission Chief Omar Toure.
For 48 years today, our sense of community has remained solid in the face of challenges, and our commitment for inclusive and sustainable development has remained strong. We are grateful to our heads of state and government who have maintained a resolute and consistent stance on the vision of our founding fathers, investing all the necessary resources to preserve the community and forge a solidarity for the advancement of our socio-economic integration agenda and the pursuit of peace, security, and stability. For the management of the Ecowas institutions, the job is already cut out for us, as the key issues confronting our region are palpable. In the area of peace and security, we are confronted with the persistence of violent conflicts and terrorism, and we live daily with the sad news of loss of lives and property. We have seen many election cycles in our member states, but violence continues to mar the successes recorded. In Mali and Burkina Faso, the intensity of the violence is concerning. We condemn in strong terms the violence, sympathize with the affected families and the authorities. We reiterate our call for international support to our region in the fight against terrorism and other forms of organized crime. The humanitarian situation is growing because of not only the conflicts, but also climate change and environmental degradation. The global economic crisis, which manifests in the form of soaring prices of food and fuel, is another challenge that tests our resolve for collective security and self-reliance. Free movement of persons, goods, and services within our community is still hindered by artificial barriers, infrastructure deficits, tariffs, and non.
Well, those are statements of the ECOWAS envoy there, Omar Toure, speaking on development marking 48 years of the ECOWAS bloc. Now, still on the issues of coup d'etats, the sub-Saharan region has been troubled by a cycle of the military coups, and after Mali, Guinea, it's now Burkina Faso's turn to suffer the wrath of the army. With the bloodless ousting of Roch Kabore from power in January 24, 2022, the head of Malian diplomacy, Abdoulaye Diop, did not mince words. And in his words, in an interview with RFI, worrying situation of the diplomat was very straightforward when pointing the finger at France in the worlds of coup d'etats in West Africa. Let's take a look. Let's take a quote from Diop blaming France for coup d'etats in West Africa. Now, in his words, he says Mali is being sanctioned because the political choice of new authorities in Mali does not suit some. We must be able to get out of this. And France applauds the coup d'etats when it is in their interest. It condemns them when they go against it. No, this double standard shall end. France has been applying this double standards to many countries. Even our African organizations have done so. And that's a word from Diop there. Now, he has warned that what's happening in Mali, Guinea, and Burkina Faso can spread throughout West Africa. All this is in a context where France is perceived as the devil's accomplice. Now, in all of that, is France being wrongly accused here? Well, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni had given an interview explaining how France continues to exploit poor African countries, which then adds to the illegal migration crisis being faced recently. Let's take a soundbite from her.
Emmanuel Macron ci ha definiti vomitevoli, cinici, irresponsabili, e qui la stampa italiana a dire visto che ha detto Macron, siamo irresponsabili. Vergogna. Irresponsabile Emmanuel Macron sono quelli che hanno bombardato la Libia perché gli dava fastidio che l'Italia avesse un rapporto privilegiato in campo energetico con Gheddafi, esponendoci al caos migrazione nel quale ci troviamo. Cinici Emmanuel Macron sono i francesi che mandano la gendarmerie a rispedire indietro qualunque immigrato tenti di passare il confine a Ventimiglia. Ma soprattutto perché le cose vanno raccontate come si deve, vomitevole e chi... Buono, te lo vuoi tu? Ci hai mai tolto il parto? Vomitevole è chi, come la Francia, continua a sfruttare l'Africa stampando moneta per 14 nazioni africane sulle quali applica il signoraggio, facendo lavorare bambini nelle miniere, estraendo materie prime come accade in Niger, dove la Francia estrae il 30% dell'uranio che gli serve a far camminare le centrali nucleari e il 90% dei nigerini vive senza elettricità. Non ci venire a fare lezioni, Macron, perché l'Africa scappa da voi e la soluzione non è spostare gli africani in Europa, è liberare l'Africa da certi europei. Non accettiamo lezioni, chiaro?
Damning revelations coming there from Italian Prime Minister Meloni about France's overbearing influence and exploitation of the West African sub-region. It will be interesting to see how President Bola Tinubu of Nigeria tackles these issues frontally, and how he will be able to stem the tide of France's overbearing influence on the region. And still, as we move on, in the issues of coup d'etats, there are implications. Why must these things stop? The population of the region estimated to be at 401.9 million as of 2020, with young people constituting over 60% of the population. This makes West Africa one of the youngest regions in the world, with high urban growth. The impact of these coups on their home countries and the region cannot be overemphasized. The UN World Food Programme reported that millions of hungry people in West Africa are without aid as the agency struggles with limited funding to respond to the region's worst hunger crisis in a decade. It warned that hundreds of thousands of people are at risk of joining armed groups, getting married early, or engaging in survival sex in their desperation to survive. Long before last year's issues and Russia's war in Ukraine, West Africa already was facing its worst food crisis in 10 years, with more than 27 million hungry people, mainly as a result of conflicts, but also due to drought and economic impacts of COVID lockdowns and lockups. In 2022, the UN World Food Programme said food insecurity in Central Africa is now affecting 47.2 million people in the lean season, which is when hunger peaks, with women and children the most vulnerable groups.
% more than the number we had last year at the same time, at the same period. And this is 4 times more than the numbers we used to see 10 years ago. So this is why we really want to call on donors' attention, on government's attention, because we know that there are so many other crises here and there, but this crisis do deserve also, to be managed, do deserve to be talked about. Another important driver that is new is the crisis in Ukraine. 6 out of the 12 countries where Oxfam operates in West Africa import their wheat from Ukraine or Russia. And because of this crisis, in Ukraine, this is no more possible. And if they cannot import wheat, that means it's creating shortage in the food available in the countries, and therefore, increasing the prices and making it very difficult for people to afford food.
Well, there you have it. It's quite interesting, the double standard, double play by the United Nations and its donor agencies, who are all who cry, who speak out over food, over hunger and starvation, and still are the ones pushing for population control through their donor agencies in the region. So these are the dynamics which Ecowas leaders must address and understand what the hidden hand is doing behind the scenes. Now, still moving on, we'll look at the evaluation of Vision 2020 of Ecowas and what has been learned as it jettisons that vision and moves on to Vision 2050. Adopted in June 2007, the Ecowas Vision 2020 was aimed at eradicating poverty and the consolidation of regional peace and security, as well as promotion of sustainable social and economic development. The vision, which had as its overreaching slogan, moving from an Ecowas of states to an Ecowas of peoples, was based on 5 pillars: peace and security, good governance, development of regions' resources, economic and monetary integration, and promotion of the private sector. Now, how many of these pillars have actually we seen fruition or the light of day in ECOWAS, in its member states, and member nations, is a different ballgame entirely. But there are challenges faced, and challenges include the decrease in the proportion of poor people within the region. However, with the income inequalities and food insecurity on the rise between 2010 and 2019, the proportion of the West African population living below the poverty line, earning $1 under $1.9 a day, has fallen from 49%, according to a report, to almost 36%. Well, Vision 2050 is designed to replace Vision 2020 with even more ambitious goals and targets. With the expiration of Vision 2020 and 48 years of Ecowas, it is hoped that the bloc and its leaders will have the political will to go beyond rhetoric to execution. Now, as we round off on today's edition of The Agenda, I leave you with a soundbite from Kenyan President William Ruto calling for a united front against amongst African leaders in engaging the West. I want to thank you for staying with us on today's edition of The Agenda. My name is Henry Williams. Until we meet again on next edition, you can find us on all platforms. I'm Henry Williams. Thanks for watching.
There is a realization that it cannot continue this way. We have what it takes to fix it. And the conversation is already begun on what do we realistically do to be able to get the African Union to take charge of the affairs of our continent. Let me give you a case in point. We decided, for example, that we are going to assemble our market using the Africa Continental Free Trade Area market.
Yes, that's good
ecosystem.
Yeah.
And the positive thing is that it was unbelievable at the rate at which we were able to achieve consensus and we were able to achieve ratification. And I want to tell you, it is among the things that happened in the shortest time possible. It tells you there is greater realization that unless we act in concert, unless we act together, we are unlikely to make any impact anywhere. We have, at least on the market issue, we have put that together. There is a debate that is going to evolve. Like, for example, we have also decided that it will not going to be business as usual. We have these meetings, Africa-US meeting, Africa-Europe, Africa-Turkey, Africa-India. Now we are waiting for, there is another one, Africa-Russia.
And Africa-Japan.
And Africa-Japan. We have made the decision that it is not intelligent for 54 of us to go and sit before one gentleman from another place. And I mean, and sometimes we are mistreated.
Yeah.
You know, we are loaded into buses like school kids. You know, and it's not right.
Well, you are summoned, you know.
It's not right. So the decision that we have made as AU is that going forward, if there is going to be a discussion between Africa and any other country, we are going to be represented by the chair, the outgoing chair, the bureau. The
chair of the commission or the chair
and the chair of the RECs, and we have 5 RECs. That should be sufficient for, I mean, a meeting of maybe 6-7. Yeah. That should be able to represent Africa.
Africa, a beautiful continent, richly endowed with so much potential, mineral resources, and immense wealth in its people. Yet, this continent, with all its beauty and endowment, has largely been an underdog, and there's so much blame to pass around. Who've done it, they say. With roughly 500 million of its population under the age of 35, Africa is currently the world's youngest continent. What are we we going to do with this? We must change the African narrative. We must engage to orchestrate new and positive outcomes and solve the socio-political and socio-economic problems of the continent. So you're young, on campus, want to be the change? Join the vanguard. Introducing the Africa for Africa Youth Initiative, maximizing Africa's resources.